Hello everyone. Happy Halloween. I felt that I should make a video for the spooky season, and despite the many scary stories that have taken place on the high seas, there aren't too many that have taken place on warships. Not of any credence, anyway. However, it is true that many museum ships are still haunted. I actually have it on good authority that one of the men who died during World War II still stands night watch aboard USS Lexington. The soul of a sailor still manning his post. But there is one vessel in the history of the United States Navy who even today conjures up stories of dark and disturbing secrets. A cover-up so grand in scale that people have been killed en masse to keep the secret, and paid actors hired for a lifetime to stand in as false witnesses, holding veterans reunions, posing as the ship's crew to throw off those searching for the dark and disturbing truth. She appears in the anime and game series Azure Lane as a girl who throws off electric discharges when submerged in water, while in popular fiction she is the subject of conspiracy, partially inspiring the 80s classic The Final Countdown, which in turn inspired the excellent anime and manga series Zippang. Both of those stories involve a modern warship travelling back in time due to some space-time distortion or other science fiction chicanery, forcing people to consider the ethics of changing the past and hence the future. But the story of USS Eldridge, the Cannon-class destroyer, also got a direct film adaptation. An adaptation which bore the name that garnered all of this controversy. Her recent cameo in the TV series Loki as a victim of the TVA gives a hint at its content. The film was named after the experiment that remains covered up and suppressed until this very day. This is the dark and disturbing tale of USS Eldridge and the sinister Philadelphia experiment. But before we go into that, let us look at the official story of USS Eldridge. On February 22nd, 1943, the hull for USS Eldridge was laid down in Newark, New Jersey, being built by the Federal Shipbuilding and Drydock Company. And given that the aforementioned US war machine was now in full swing, she was launched just 5 months later on the 25th of July of the same year. After outfitting and workups for a month, she was then commissioned on the 27th of August. 6 months to build, outfit, crew, and sail a combat vessel. And they did all of this while building Liberty ships, as well as several subs and destroyers at the same time. You guys know what's coming.
I got 7 Mac 11s, about 8 38s, 9 9s, 10 Mac 10s, the ships never end.
God, American industry is impressive. Anyway. The ship's log after that is perfectly normal for a US destroyer. She served as an escort on the Atlantic convoys, shipping supplies to the troops in Italy and North Africa. Then Operation Dragoon happened, that being the invasion of southern France in support of D-Day. She escorted supplies to the beachhead there until in 1945, when Mustache Man called it quits. With the war in Europe over, she was detailed to Pacific duty, transiting the Suez Canal and heading to Saipan, attacking a Japanese submarine on the way, but with no result. After resupplying at the US base on Saipan, she protected convoys to Okinawa until the end of hostilities at the end of August. After that, Europe faced a problem, which doctors these days have diagnosed as surprise communism. And as part of a mutual defense agreement with the Greek government to stave off the Red Menace, USS Eldridge was transferred to the Hellenic Navy, the Greek Navy, where she remained in faithful service until her decommissioning on November 5th, 1992. After this, she was sold to a scrapyard and taken apart in 1999. This is the official story of USS Eldridge, and the story that is recorded in her ship's log. However, according to a man by the name of Carl M. Allen, this is all a lie, a fabrication, a deceit. Allen sent a copy of conspiracy theorist and science fiction author Morris K. Jessup's book, The Case for the UFO, Unidentified Flying Objects, to the Office of Naval Research. This book was filled with his own annotations and edits, hinting at experiments being conducted by the US military along the lines of the technology featured in the book. notably UFO propulsion, teleportation, and most of all, cloaking. This was investigated by a group from the ONR department, but of course no evidence was found. However, Allen swore that his story was true and wrote to the book's author, warning him to stop his investigation into UFOs. As letters went back and forth, he then began detailing the whole story, including having a meeting with the author in person, where he showed an original copy of the book he sent to the Office of Naval Research. And that story goes something like this. After Eldridge was commissioned, there was a gap between her commissioning in August 43 and her deployment in January of 1944. Allen told Jessup, the author, that during this time the US Navy had installed incredible amounts of experimental technology into the ship, including triple the regular number of electrics, as well as way more antennas and transmitting devices than her sisters. It was also implied that the stats on her engines were faked, and they were capable of much more power and propulsion than was listed on her official specifications. This was all being done to test theories posited by Albert Einstein regarding unified field theory. To translate it into plain English, the major forces of the universe, light, gravity, electromagnetism, and the bonds that form concentrated matter, are all built into a singular framework. This is then formed as part of special relativity and general relativity, which of course connects into space-time and the wonderful wide world of physics and quantum physics. Now, I am not intelligent enough nor qualified to go into detail here. I will leave that to the plethora of science channels who are way more awesome and worthy of your attention than I. But I can give you some historical context. Einstein was one of the key figures to explain the potential of nuclear physics to the US military via correspondence with FDR. He was the driving force behind the formation of the Manhattan Project, or at least one of them. He didn't want to build the bomb, but he knew that if the Nazis built one, it could be disastrous. Anyway, in his writings to Jessup, Allen asserted that Einstein, during these conversations, had secretly provided practical advice around putting these unified field theories to use for a variety of military purposes, and that the USS Eldridge had attempted to use her special equipment to achieve those military purposes. The first of these purposes was something straight out of Star Trek, a show that wouldn't exist for almost a decade, but it is relevant, hear me out. That being a cloaking device. Now, theoretically, we have worked out how to make one, at least, that it is possible to use refraction to hide objects by manipulating light waves to sort of flow around an object. But this involves mirrors, glass, submersion in a liquid that reflects light in a way that means light passes through something. It's very bulky and complicated, and involves a lot of technology that is, quite frankly, beyond us. Allen asserted that the ship had enough power in it to bend light and matter itself around the vessel, obscuring it from vision. Apparently, in the Philadelphia Naval Yard, USS Eldridge vanished right in front of him, and then reappeared. However, something had gone terribly wrong. Which leads into the other theory. Teleportation. Apparently, for a brief period of mere minutes, the USS Eldridge was invisible. When it reappeared, an odd green haze covered the harbour, but what met the eyes of the observers was a scene of utter horror. The crew had gone insane, screaming into the void, vomiting endlessly, writhing in agony from uncontrollable migraines. But worst of all, some of the men had been fused into the structure of the ship, with hands and legs and even torsos melting through the steel. Their insides compressed and filled with the same green ooze seen floating across the harbour. The US Navy immediately moved and silenced the crew, which explains the new crew that boarded when Eldridge deployed in 1944. Some say they silenced them by brainwashing, some say murder. But all we know is that none of the crew remember this, and it does not appear in any of the logs. And just as well, because the remaining crew were silenced another way. On the 28th of October, another experiment was conducted, and the same phenomena was observed. The ship vanished, only for it to reappear. Only the after effects were worse. Much, much worse. Almost the entire crew were mangled and maimed, their bodies almost liquefied as though they were green jelly, fused into the ship. Some men were frozen upright like statues, literally dead on their feet. Others were intangible, as though they were phasing in and out of existence, screaming yet no noise could be heard, as though their minds had snapped, before they would soon vanish totally into oblivion. And some men turned inside out, their guts spilling across the deck. The ship had vanished and then reappeared, but something most peculiar had happened. There were reports that the ship had materialized out of thin air in Norfolk Naval Yard in Virginia, which I'm reliably informed by some sailors is a fate actually worse than death, so perhaps they got lucky. But what was stranger was that the chronometers and the clocks on the ship were all 10 minutes behind. Despite being set to both local time and Zulu time, it appeared that the USS Eldridge had gone back in time. After practically the entire crew was killed or horribly maimed, the US Navy abandoned the project. However, to prevent the absolute horrific details from being leaked to the public, as well as to prevent classified experimental data falling into the hands of the Soviets, the survivors were either brainwashed or had an accident. Only the captain, Lieutenant C.R. Hamilton, of the US Naval Reserve being left in charge. Although when I went looking for his file, I couldn't find it. It was as though it had vanished. No photo, no reference, nothing. Furthermore, all the equipment had been removed by her deployment to the Pacific, so no physical evidence was left for the Greeks to find when they inherited the ship. And to this day, the veterans of USS Eldridge deny any experiments. The original crew is nowhere to be found. Of course, the official US Navy story is that these are wild and fanciful tales born out of fears from experimental degaussing techniques being tested by the ship docked next door, USS Engstrom, in order to defeat the magnetic mines deployed by U-boats along the eastern seaboard. While the official investigation, air quotes, by the ONR found nothing to substantiate these claims, which leaves two options. First, there has been an incredible cover-up. And as we know, with the Contra scandal, the Pentagon Papers, WikiLeaks, and the Snowden affair, the US government is not opposed to using any methods to keep its secrets. And as we've seen with various politicians, including with the recent events surrounding a certain gentleman on so-called unalive watch, people with important information tend to disappear. In fact, Jessup, after receiving all of this information about Eldridge, published books referencing the story, as well as other books that overlapped with his UFO research, rather coincidentally overlapping with investigations conducted by Project Blue Book. He was found dead in his car in 1959, having apparently checked out by gassing himself with the exhaust fumes. The other option, of course, is that this is all a fabrication and a hoax, which has since been confirmed by Mr. Allen himself, and of course, all official records support that USS Eldridge had a perfectly normal service life. So what do I think is true? Well, as we've established, there have been many conspiracy theories about the US government that have turned out to be true, and in the case of the military, those theories are usually at least partially correct. NSA spying, Contra, the Tuskegee experiment, the proposed Cuba plan, which bears a striking resemblance to certain events in the beginning of the 21st century, and of course the Pentagon Papers and WikiLeaks. So the idea that they are conducting experiments on a US Navy vessel against their own people is not far-fetched in the slightest. After all, the US War Department had some of the finest physicists in the world on the payroll at the time. They couldn't have all been working on the same thing. However, the physics and methods proposed do not match up with what we know about how things could be achieved. The science just isn't there. Standard engines and generators would not provide enough power for matter transmission, nor do they have a method of compressing and converting the matter, much less transporting it. However, if you could harness the gravimetric force of a singularity, a black hole for people who speak plain English, you could theoretically, and I mean really theoretically, compress something into a quantum level of size and then rematerialize it in a different space-time. Think Ant-Man in Endgame. It's all relative, right? Particle accelerators were available in the 1940s, and with minds like Einstein behind them, one could perhaps, just maybe on a ship, like on a structure that's as big as a ship, You could perhaps build an accelerator powerful enough to smash particles together at such force that you could create a singularity. However, the creation of a micro-black hole hasn't been achieved by anyone, at least according to the official information we have in science circles, right? Hey, what's happening to my audio? This is fucking weird, eh?
Hello. My name is John Titor. If you're watching this video, you now know too much and are in grave danger, so listen very carefully to what I have to say. Animarchy's theory is correct. The effects achieved by the USS Eldridge were only effective for a few moments, but they did achieve the creation of a micro-singularity. This allowed them to travel through a very short period of time, while also traveling hundreds of miles. The casualties and the monetary cost in doing so, though, was far too high, as he said, so the US government halted the experiment, which was deemed too dangerous to continue, and the technology too primitive to be effective. The project was closed down completely soon after. But the scientists who worked on that project continued their work, and after the Nazis were defeated, they returned home to Europe. They never gave up on their idea of teleportation, and more importantly, they never gave up on their idea of time travel. I myself am a time traveler from the year 2036. In my time, the research organization those scientists founded has a near monopoly on time travel. They have taken over the world, forming a hyper-authoritarian government with a brainwashing technique unmatched and unparalleled using chips. The technology is beyond understanding. And they achieve the rest of their power through systematic slaughter. Even now, a rounder hit squad may be on their way to you. We don't have time. All of this started with the Eldridge. The organization's name is CERN. They are using their Large Hadron Collider to research miniature singularities, miniature black holes. The liquefaction, the green mist, the jelly-like consistency of men fused to the ship, all of this is consistent with their early-phase time travel experiments. Should they succeed in building a time machine, this timeline will end in a living hell. We only have one hope. You have to find the man who can remember different timelines. You have to find the man who can save us. The only problem is we only know his alias. His alias is Hoin Kyoma. Please find him. Find him so he can get us out of here. Save yourself and the world. Good luck. And remember the passcode. L. Psi. Congru.